Among conservatives in the United States, one of the chief issues for many is the question of states' rights. Many Americans are not too fond of the idea of the federal government having such direct influence over their daily lives, and understandably so. The United States is a huge country, and what works for Americans in this part of the country might not work for Americans in that part of the country. And frankly, even non-conservative Americans hold this mindset when the faction they don't support uses federal power. The advantage most liberals have had in the United States is that, relatively speaking, most conservatives in recent times, when they have held federal power, don't do very much with it. But when they do use that power, something you saw especially under the Trump administration, you see much of that same reaction of "not in my state." Deep blue states like California, Oregon, Washington, New York, Massachusetts, they all scramble to secure a local status quo when this happens, or they even double down. Take what happened in the aftermath of the overturning of Roe v. Wade, for instance, where conservatives successfully rolled the issue of abortion back to the states, and many Democrats quickly acted to not only expand access within their own states, but also push for protections across several other states like Ohio, Kansas, and Montana. It's fair to say that in the United States, you have multiple populations which want to govern their own way, free of the overbearing weight of outsiders who govern differently from themselves. Not just the states, but the populations within those states. And it goes far deeper than conservative, liberal, Republican, Democratic lines. That is merely the most surface level of difference in political interest. Now, the United States is already a federation and already has most of the infrastructure in place to be a well-run and truly representative country that gives a voice to all of its citizens and gives all of them a state or community where they can truly feel at home with policy that represents them. Think about it, we have 50 states. Those states all have their own constitutions, they have their own laws, their own courts, their own police forces, their own chief executives, their own Congress. Is that not sufficient to provide optimal representation and specially tailored local government? Why are so many Americans, now over half, dissatisfied with their state governments and approximately 80% dissatisfied with their federal government? Take a look at a state like Georgia, or a state like New York, or a state like Pennsylvania, or Ohio, Illinois, Missouri, California, Oregon, Virginia. You see what I'm getting at. We have states with all of this local authority, but instead of dividing that authority among different populations with distinct interests, you've lumped them all together, sometimes in states that are literal rectangles, and expect this to be a fair way of distributing local authority. It defeats the purpose. Imagine drawing borders in any other part of the world this way. It would cause chaos and unrest. Imagine you have 5 different groups of people in a country who all want different things, and you promise to give each of them their own states where they can have the economics and social policy and local government that they want. But then you draw the borders of those 5 states to have a big near equal chunk of all 5 groups in each state. Meaning the states don't give any of those groups local autonomy, you've just made 5 miniature versions of the federal government and solved none of its problems. This is the reality most states in the United States suffer from. Despite efforts to provide representative government at the local level through state governments, the states fail time and time again because they do not represent any single lifestyle or culture, but more often than not, compromise between different state populations for outcomes which satisfy no one, or worse yet, see domination by one small subsection of the state at the cost of all others. So the question for conservatives, and really all Americans who want their state governments to reflect the will of the local population, do your state's rights really matter if your state lines don't reflect your lives? Hello audience, Mr. Z here with another video for you. If you're new to the channel, welcome. We have videos just like this every week, and believe it or not, only about 25% of you watching are actually subscribed to the channel right now. So if you enjoy this type of content, I hope you'll hit that subscribe button and stick around. And if you are subscribed, fellas, only like 15% of you have your notifications on. YouTube's subscription system is seriously confusing sometimes, but basically if you really want to be subscribed to the channel, you need to click that bell icon and activate those notifications. Now, back to our regularly scheduled program. Most of us are probably familiar with gerrymandering, and for many it can be a real thorn. The foremost reason, of course, because we see it as a dishonest strategy for favoring one political faction over the other. But push the party politics aside. Gerrymandering does worse than that when it actively attempts to disenfranchise a region or population by lumping their votes up with those of a disconnected and larger population. We call this watering down a vote, and you see it all the time when redistricting happens. The states unintentionally do the very same thing. Because the borders of the states are so arbitrary and don't adapt or change as populations change, you essentially have situations in which a bunch of disconnected populations are lumped together in one block that not only votes together but governs together, and does so in a way where there are no winners, and no one gets what they actually want. How dysfunctional is that? If states' rights actually matter, if state governments actually matter, if the states themselves actually matter, then their borders should matter as well. Now some might say, you just brought up gerrymandering. If we were to redraw state borders, what's to stop somebody from just favoring one group over another? In redrawing state lines or districts, the issue isn't the redrawing itself. That's recognized as necessary. That's why we redraw districts in the first place, because they need to adapt to population change over time. The problem is how they are redrawn. In most states, districts are drawn up by the legislature and approved by the governor, both of which are usually dominated by a single party, thus allowing for absurd gerrymandering that fortifies the party's hold over that state while disenfranchising many in opposition. Some states use the independent and bipartisan commissions, which are certainly a move in the right direction. However, oftentimes these commissions make achieving party parity, not achieving community representation, their goal, trying to split the state among even party lines as closely as possible in a supposed effort to achieve fairness, but really just having the interests of the party, not the people, in mind. And that's assuming those in charge are actually independent or bipartisan at all. The redrawing of districts, as with the redrawing of states, shouldn't be something delegated to partisan politicians, but experts preferably from these same communities who understand how their homes work. In all frankness here, what is the function of a district if not to provide representation to the people of that district? We have legal provisions established by the Voting Rights Act that say you can't draw a district to disenfranchise a racial minority, but why stop there? The 1986 Supreme Court ruling of Thornburg v. Jingles established the Jingles test to determine if a minority population was having its vote diluted. The test features 3 points. 1. Minority cohesion. The racial or language minority group is sufficiently numerous and compact to form a majority in a single-member district. 2. Political cohesion. The minority group is politically cohesive, meaning its members tend to vote similarly. And 3. Majority cohesion. The majority votes sufficiently as a bloc to enable it, usually to defeat the minority's preferred candidate. Right there you have a ruling come very close to recognizing the importance of representation for different groups in America, but in this ruling there's only account for race, language, and political cohesion. Why not include additional factors which could further recognize cohesive units not merely for minority groups, but for every group in America with distinct interests, so that all these groups can have a meaningful say in the shaping of the country? The fact is, if we can do this for districts, we can absolutely do this for states. Representation for the various communities in this country all struggling to preserve their ways of life and fighting just to get one stubborn law across the goal line so they can get closer to where they want to be. It shouldn't be that hard. For a state, you shouldn't have it pulling itself in opposite directions. At best these days, you have it going in opposite directions. More often than not, it's pulling in every which direction and ends up getting nowhere. The country can run more efficiently and more fairly than this. This is why I talk about things like Utahism, the idea of redrawing US state borders to be more representative, to promote something that seems like it should have been so obvious, to readjust the state borders to reflect the lives of the people who live in them. This is hard to do for foreign countries and newly formed unions, but people do it anyway. Meanwhile, the United States are one country. Why do we struggle so hard to correct something as simple as the subdivisions of one country? With all the talk conservatives have for small and local government, for all the talk liberals have of promoting inclusion and diversity, for all the anger both sides seem to feel when they can't get their way, why has a mass readjustment of state boundaries never gained a spotlight? It's really about time that changed, and this started being a discussion in American politics. In the past 2 decades, there have been at least 24 movements to change the borders or status of lands within the United States across Michigan, Wyoming, Montana, South Dakota, North Dakota, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland, Oklahoma, Arizona, Alaska, Texas, California, Colorado, Illinois, New York, and more. Clearly, there is a desire for new state borders that can provide for a population a higher quality of representation at the state level, a governor, legislature, and state constitution that reflects the interests of the people who inhabit it, and the lifestyle they want to live and pass on to future generations. You have an excess of people in the United States today on the left and right who feel as though their very ways of life are under attack, and this doesn't just have a polarizing effect, it has a radicalizing effect. People are getting angrier and angrier because it seems to them that they have no voice and no security, that the things they hold dear and the communities they've spent their whole lives in will be ripped away, and the future that they have been working toward is constantly being stalled or denied. That absolutely cannot continue. These fears can be alleviated and the public's needs met if America were actually organized and run as a federation is actually supposed to be, providing representation to the groups who compose the population. We do have in this country a hyperfixation on illusory state identities instead of the true national identities rooted in values, culture, lifestyle, and history. The borders of these states should not be sacred totems that are never altered. The states are artificial. They are constructs meant to represent what actually matters in the country, the people of the country. And if the state fails to be representative of that people, that state should be adjusted. When people are so attached to the current boundaries of their state just because that's the way they've always been, and they would choose that over a government that more accurately represents them and their values, then there is a serious problem, and that mindset needs to change. But those are just my thoughts. Let me know what you think in the comments below, like the video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe for more. Mr. Z, out.